A chilly wind sneaks into the entrance of a rough-hewn cave and brushes the tangled hair of a snoring, snorting, fully unconscious early human. Welcome to the start of another busy day in the Stone Age. Forget Netflix lattes or doom-scrolling Twitter. This was a time when morning routines involved not skincare serums and breakfast smoothies, but checking to make sure you didn't freeze to death overnight and hoping nobody in the tribe wandered off sleepwalking into a saber-toothed tiger's jaws. Yet despite the bleak landscape and the ever-present possibility of becoming dinner, our ancestors didn't spend their days just running from predators and inventing fire. So what did cavemen actually do all day? Let's take a journey through a typical prehistoric day, full of flint, fur, foraging, and surprisingly relatable moments of human absurdity. Mornings in the Paleolithic period weren't marked by alarm clocks so much as the smell of smoke, the sound of babies wailing, and someone loudly stepping on a sharp rock. Most early humans lived in tight-knit groups or clans, which meant personal space was less spa retreat and more human sardine can. Sleeping quarters? A mix of animal hides, dirt, and hope. If you were lucky, you had a cozy corner near the fire. If not, you were probably spooning someone who hadn't bathed in weeks. The first order of business: check if you're still alive. Then check if everyone else is. Once the roll call of grunts and groans was completed, it was time for stoking the fire. Peeing in designated spots, primitive hygiene matters. Looking at the sky and wondering why that one star won't move, spoiler, it was probably Venus. Then came food. There were no bacon and eggs, no cereal, no oat milk. Breakfast was whatever was left over from yesterday, or whatever you could scrounge from the nearby bushes. A handful of berries? Delicious. Some leftover mammoth shank that was buried in snow to preserve it? Score. A grub crawling under a log? Don't knock it till you try it. Foraging played a huge role in early human life. It was typically the job of women, children, and older members to search for roots, nuts, berries, and edible greens. This was less grocery shopping and more intense, potentially lethal scavenger hunt. Pro tip: don't eat the bright red berries unless you want to spend the rest of your day in a digestive death match. While half the group gathered food, the other half, usually the younger, stronger members, grabbed their pointy sticks, grunted affirmatively, and headed out to try and bring down something large and meaty. Hunting was both a necessity and a colossal gamble. Some days you came home with a boar, other days you came home with nothing but a broken spear and a new limp. Cavemen didn't just run around stabbing things at random. They used teamwork, basic strategy, and a lot of shouting. A typical hunt might involve tracking footprints or scat, corralling prey into a natural trap like a ravine, screaming loudly to confuse and panic animals and each other. It was like a chaotic group project with zero communication skills and a high chance of bodily harm. Hunting wasn't daily for every tribe. It was exhausting and dangerous, so if the hunt was off for the day, other tasks took priority. Crafting tools, fixing shelters, arguing over whose turn it was to scrape the hide. After the morning chaos, midday was for chores. And yes, cavemen had chores. These included sharpening stone tools, making new spears or arrows, weaving baskets or netting, prehistoric arts and crafts, tanning hides, which involved brains, no, really, fixing whatever structure the last windstorm tried to demolish. It wasn't all hard labor. Socializing was a big part of the day. Humans are, and always have been, profoundly social. This was the time for storytelling, gossiping. Did you see how Grog fell into the river again? And maybe teaching a kid how not to stab themselves with a flint shard. There may not have been language as we know it, but body gestures, vocalizations, and facial expressions got the job done. Early humans could communicate surprisingly complex things with nothing more than a well-timed grunt and an eyebrow raise. Here's where it gets unexpectedly wholesome. Many groups used downtime to express themselves. Cave paintings, carvings, beads, and even primitive music, think banging rocks or blowing into bones, were all part of daily life. We don't know for sure why they did it. Maybe religious ritual, maybe storytelling, maybe just because Og was the Paleolithic Picasso. Either way, creativity wasn't just a luxury, It was a core part of human life. They made things that had no immediate survival value simply because they wanted to. That, if anything, makes them incredibly relatable. If a hunt was successful, and that's a big if considering you were chasing hairy tanks with sticks, the rest of the day shifted into post-victory mode. The group would spend the afternoon hauling the prize back to camp, a grueling task that turned everyone into makeshift sled dogs. Imagine dragging several hundred pounds of meat and bone over rocky terrain, through snowdrifts or dense brush, all while trying not to attract every hungry predator within sniffing distance. Once they arrived back at camp, exhausted, elated, and probably bleeding somewhere, the real work began. This wasn't a quick microwave dinner situation. It was a full-blown, all-hands-on-deck meat marathon. Tasks were divvied up with the same urgency you'd expect from a pit crew at a Formula One race. First up, skinning the animal, a job that required sharp stone tools, strong stomachs, and a total lack of squeamishness. The hide had to be removed in one mostly intact piece, ideally without puncturing it or covering yourself in warm, oily gore. Spoiler, the second one was nearly impossible. The smell? Somewhere between wet dog, iron, and despair. But the hides were vital for clothing, blankets, shelter, insulation, so people powered through. Next came the butchering. This wasn't elegant carving, it was raw, primal hacking with flint knives and bone tools, accompanied by a symphony of squelches, cracks, and the occasional ouch when someone slipped and got a little too enthusiastic. They'd divide the meat, muscle for roasting, fat for energy, organs for nutrition and sometimes rituals, and bones for marrow or tool making. Nothing was wasted. Prehistoric people were the original zero-waste pioneers. Then, roasting. Meat was skewered on wooden spits or laid across hot stones near the fire, slowly cooking as the sun dipped low. Smoke filled the air, mixing with the scent of sizzling fat and burned hair. Kids ran around with chunks of meat on a stick. Elders supervised the fire, and someone inevitably started licking their fingers way too early. And all the while, they had to fend off scavengers. Hungry wolves circled just beyond the firelight, eyes gleaming with opportunism. Birds the size of toddlers dive-bombed for scraps. A distracted moment could mean losing a shank of meat to a bold raven, or worse, drawing in a curious bear. So while the feast was a celebration, it was also an exercise in vigilance and stick-waving defense. If the hunt failed, it was back to the bushes for more roots and the occasional emotional support grub. Afternoons were also prime time for drama. Arguments could erupt over food, mating rights, or someone hogging the best sleeping spot. But conflict resolution was also a thing, somehow. Maybe it involved scowling and walking away. Maybe it involved a wrestling match. Maybe someone just threw a bone and walked it off. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the tribe gathered around the fire. This was the most magical time of the day. Food was shared, stories were told, knowledge was passed on. Someone inevitably tried to balance a stick on their nose. This was where oral tradition began. Myths, warnings, jokes, and family histories were all passed down by flickering firelight. The elders might share tales of great hunts or explain the constellations with wild hand gestures and exaggerated sound effects. Kids would be both terrified and thrilled. Fire wasn't just warmth or cooking. It was the social glue of early humans. It allowed for reflection, for connection, and yes, for fart jokes that echoed through the ages. After dinner, everyone settled in for the night. The fire burned low. A few people stood watch. Others snored loudly. Children curled up with parents. Lovers whispered in the dark, or just awkwardly bumped into each other and hoped no one noticed. Sleep wasn't peaceful. Threats still lurked. Wild animals, rival tribes, natural disasters. But with community, with fire, and with the knowledge that they'd made it through another day, the clan rested. And then, just as sleep took hold, someone farted, and the entire cave shook with stifled giggles. They survived. They collaborated, they created, they argued and laughed and tried not to get eaten. Every day was a delicate balance between chaos and community, where survival wasn't just about muscle and grit. It was about working together, sharing knowledge, and building something bigger than just the individual. They taught their children how to sharpen stone tools, how to find edible roots, how to read the sky and the tracks in the snow. They passed down stories with no written words, only gestures, songs, symbols, and wide-eyed mimicry around the fire. They grieved their dead with rituals we're only beginning to understand, burying them with care, with flowers or ochre or objects of meaning, proving that even in the harshest conditions, love and memory endured. They learned new skills by trial, error, and a lot of bruises. They turned sticks and rocks into tools and weapons. They discovered how to shape the world around them, however slightly, in their favor. They made art not just to decorate, but to document, to dream, and maybe to deal with the bigness of existence in a world filled with darkness, danger, and awe. They left behind paintings on walls that still speak across tens of thousands of years. Handprints, bison, stick figures dancing or hunting. All silent echoes of lives once lived. Not just functional lives, but felt lives. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to understand. They wanted to express something beyond the immediate now. That's not just survival. That's humanity. They weren't just dirty, grunting caricatures dragging clubs and clubbing each other. They were clever. They were curious. They were emotional, empathetic, and surprisingly inventive. They knew fear, joy, jealousy, wonder. They had inside jokes. They had heartbreaks. They had bad days, off days, and days where everything somehow just worked. They had routines and rituals, chores and choices, joys and jokes. And just like us, they found meaning in little things. A full belly, a warm fire, the sound of laughter, the feeling of someone's hand on your shoulder after a hard day. They didn't have calendars, but they understood seasons. They didn't have smartphones, but they knew how to connect. In other words, they were us. Hairier, smellier, but fundamentally us. Built of the same bones, driven by the same needs, to survive, to belong, to make sense of the chaos, and to leave something behind. So next time you're making toast, walking your dog, or zoning out in a work meeting, remember, somewhere deep in your DNA is a caveman who did the same, just with more mammoths, fewer emails, and a whole lot more grunting. That part of you, the part that adapts, endures, learns, and laughs, is ancient. You carry the torch they lit with fire they sparked by hand. And whether you're navigating a spreadsheet or a snowstorm, you're continuing the story they started. You are, in your own way, still learning how to ride the mammoth. And honestly, you're doing just fine.